Hello and good day, everyone, and welcome to another topic on our UTES course entitled The Self in Western and Eastern Thoughts. So let's begin. For today's lesson, we have the following intended learning outcomes. At the end of the lesson, we are expected to compare and to contrast individualism and collectivism, and we will be identifying various manifestations of individualistic and collectivistic cultures among Filipinos, and also be evaluating the philosophies according to their relevance to ourselves. Now, the two questions: do we exist for ourselves or for others? And do we live for self realization and the self actualization, or do we live for the common good? These two questions may summarize our topic for today. First, we will be talking about individualism versus collectivism. Individualism is an orientation concerned with the independence and self-reliance of the individual, meaning the person has this confidence, has something to show to the world that they can and be able to survive on their own. While on the other hand, collectivism is an orientation characterized by belongingness to larger groups or collectives. Collectives or collectivistic cultures, on the other hand, give more importance to loyalty in the group, which in turn takes care of the individual's welfare. While on the opposite end, individualistic cultures put more emphasis on promoting the individual and the immediate family's welfare. For the Western conception of the self, it is individualistic. It gives more emphasis on freedom of choice and an independent self that is free from influence of culture and environment and from the expectations and the welfare of society. It emphasizes the uniqueness of every individual and is predicated on egoism or self-orientedness. It describes the self as existing and distinct from others. Individualism foregrounds that a human being has a self, is an individual, and is a person. It gives more emphasis on individual goals and his or her journey towards self realization or self actualization. In other words, the Western conception of the self treats the self as an entity that is free to express itself. Just to put some emphasis, the West values freedom and choice and wants to free itself from the bondage of society, meaning the Western orientation or individuals from the West, they seek to create their own identity. Moving forward to the Eastern conception of the self, the Easterners are collectivistic and they give more importance on relationships, roles, duties, obligations, and the preservation of culture and tradition. This conception of the self prioritizes the needs and goals of society over the needs and the desires of every individual. It is founded on the belief that people are socially connected. It puts more importance on belongingness to a larger group and emphasizes social obligations. Individual behavior is guided by adjustments to social demands and situations. Basically, the Easterners are others oriented because they encourage people to be kind, benevolent, charitable, dependable, and sensitive to the needs of others. It promotes selflessness, sacrifice for the other, and the welfare of others, and also the performance of assigned roles. Collectivism stresses that an individual has many selves. Instead of having a one knowable self, the self is viewed as part of the we instead of a me. Now, for the individualistic culture, people might describe themselves in terms of personality traits and characteristics. Let's say, for example, the individualists or the individualistic culture may say, I am brave, generous, loyal, and honest. While on the other hand, from the collectivistic culture or the collectivists would more likely describe themselves in terms of social relationship and roles. Like, for example, I am a law abiding citizen, or I am a loyal husband. Individualism does not promote isolation, but it is grounded on the idea that an individual makes judgments, acts based on his or her own thoughts, and disagrees with others, meaning the person is not a conformist. He doesn't follow what the majority is saying. An individual has the capacity to consider his or her own volition and norms, meaning his or her action, and also the policies and the rules set by a certain society, and can judge other people as good to form relationship or as bad to elude interaction. Everyone is free to decide whether to take part or not in solving societal problems. Collectivism, on the other hand, is an idea that man should think, live, and act toward certain goals that benefit the group. A group may be a family, a clan, community, nation, or the entire human race. A group is composed of individuals forming the so-called superorganism that is separated from other individuals. An individual decides according to the interest of the group. Countries with generally individualistic cultures include New Zealand, Germany, Austria, Greece, Poland, Italy, Belgium, Ireland, Spain, and Finland. On the other hand, countries, especially the growing ones, are generally collectivistic cultures, and they may include the nations such as Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Indonesia, Philippines, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Portugal. Let's go now to the discussion on certain notable and influential philosophies and what could they also say and what are their views about the self. In Buddhism, there is no such a thing as the Atman, or the other term for the self. The Atman, or the self, is impossible to be defined according to them. It is also impossible to be perceived by one's senses, for it does not actually exist in any metaphysical, material, and spiritual level. But it can be seen as the pure and changing, uncontaminated essence of the individual. It is even regarded as an illusion, an imaginary concept born as a product of the evolved consciousness and misguided thinking of humans. Humans have no real knowledge of a self or a clear proof of claiming that there is a self. Everything is just an illusion, a flux of momentary perceptions, thoughts, and feelings. What is perceived by one's sense becomes one's reality. Talking about the Buddhist philosophy, it refutes the idea of having an enduring self, meaning a self that stands the test of time, for it only implies that something is permanent or never changing. Buddhism does not consider humans as persons with a fixed and unified identity. Instead, a human being is a product of five changing processes: the processes of the physical body, the feelings, the perceptions, the responses, and the flow of consciousness that experiences them all. And the process of identification or selecting patterns to call the I, the me, and myself is the subtle and usually hidden from our awareness. So it is a subtle process. One can identify with his or her body, feelings, and thoughts, or with images, patterns, roles, and archetypes. This is when the sense of the self arises. One may identify with the role of a man or a woman, a parent or a child. Yet, these are not one's true identity. In Buddhist terms, the anatta or the no self is not a denial of existence, but it is a conviction that no words can define the essence of this present moment of existence. So the Buddhist philosophy is quite deep to also understand, because in the Buddhist perspective, we could say that entities should be seen more as processes rather than something that is static, or that could also be considered to be substantive things. Some processes, like a thought for example, may fade instantly while others last much longer, but nothing is ever permanent or unchanging. The entire universe should be seen as one causal process, with entities being sub-processes within the whole. Likewise, reality is one and everything that exists, including each individual. And it is a process within the larger ongoing reality. What Buddhism tries to reject is the conception of the self as unchanging and separate unto itself. The Buddhist version of the creation of the human being is taken from the Hinduism's story of creation in the Upanishads. So let's move now to another philosophy, which is Confucianism. Confucianism is a way of life by Confucius and regards the individual as a member of a larger whole, not as a separate being. The ethical teachings of Confucius are based on the human relationships as reflected in his concept of five cardinal relationships, or the five bonds. These relationships exist between, first, the king and his subject. Second is between the father and the son. Third is between the husband and the wife. Fourth is between brothers. And fifth is between friends. In this identified five bonds, if individuals perform their respective roles, there will be harmony. According to Confucius, individual identity is defined by membership in the reference group to which one belongs. This identity is called the relational self. Each member must possess the same qualities that the group preserves and cherishes. Each member shares the pride that the group claims and is united in every success or failure. Confucius also introduced another concept of the self, which is the subdued self. It is a concept wherein the self is not conditioned to its own needs and aspirations, but of social requirements and obligations. It is rather conditioned to respond to perceptions. To subdue oneself, that means to also practice Ren, or human-heartedness, meaning Ren is a virtue characterized by altruistic behavior, meaning to say you are selfless as an individual. You are thinking about other people's needs and prioritize them. So this is the hallmark, or Ren is the hallmark of Confucian ethics. And having an altruistic behavior, meaning to say you are a nurturing kind because you believe that everyone must be nurtured. And it can be understood as love, benevolence, or charity. A subdued self, therefore, is being a person for others. Let's move now to the discussion relating to a religion called Taoism, or the religion that emphasizes the way or the path, or the Tao. Taoism, which emphasizes living in harmony with the path taken, is a religion and also a philosophy at the same time. Tao is nothing but the expression of the unity of the universe and of the path which human beings must take to preserve that unity. The path starts with the knowledge of the origin of the universe. Although it is difficult to define due to the abstract meanings connected to it, Tao is the core concept of the Taoist beliefs and practices. It is referred to as the life force that surrounds and flows through all living and non-living organisms or things. And it balances, orders, unifies, and connects them. Tao is the ultimate creative principle of the universe. Now, knowledge of the universe or nature can be attained by studying the self, because Taoists regard the human body as the miniature of the universe, as like an extension of the cosmos. Going against the will of nature or the universe disrupts the cosmic order, or being symbolized by the yin and the yang. Taoism does not support the philosophical teachings of Confucius about self and society. It does not consider the self as an extension of social relationships. Rather, the self is but one of the countless manifestations of the Tao, or the way. Let's move now to our discussion relating to the Hinduism. The Upanishads contain some of the key concepts and ideas of Hinduism. The Hinduist view about the self was written in the Upanishad story of creation, which tells us about the origin of the universe and also the human beings. The story goes like this. In the beginning, this was like being described that the self was alone. The self is like an entity, or it could also be like a person, okay, or in the shape of a person called Purusha. He looked around and saw nothing but his self. He first said, "This is I," and therefore he became I by name. Therefore, even man is asked, he first says, "This is I," and then pronounces the name which he may have. From this story of creation, the self called Purusha created a wife out of himself. The wife bore man and then transformed herself into a cow, which prompted Purusha, or the self, to transform into a bull. Then Purusha's wife transformed into a mare, or a female horse, while Purusha, on the other hand, transformed into a stallion. These continuous transformations imply the belief that all creation is made up of the same self, as everything originated from Purusha. And this also implies that the creator is the same as the creation. For the Hindus, the Atman, referred to as the self, the spirit, or the soul, it is considered to be the same as the self described in the creation. And the Atman is one with the Brahman. which is the absolute transcendental power. And by being identified with the Brahman, the Atman indicates a true self which underlies one's existence. In this perspective, the Atman is viewed as a spiritual, immaterial being that must be detached from the material world and the worldly possessions.